I am so happy to be among you today. I didn't think after 2 weeks in New York City that I'd be preaching in such a beautiful space, surrounded by beautiful people. I'm used to preaching in Cuba in a very small church, the size of this carpet, more or less, where we all sit around and look at each other, and I preach sitting down, so I'm a bit uncomfortable preaching standing up. But it's just amazing to be here. And of all days, on this Pride Sunday, and I keep thinking of my people back in Cuba. Today, we're also celebrating. We're also thinking of all those battles that took place in the streets not far from this church. Battles where people lost their lives, people gave their lives for something that some people call today marriage equality, but that I prefer to call human dignity. A deeper struggle that pushes us to think more critically that we are not just LGBT, TTI, or how many other alphabet letters you want to add. That it's more of us just than being queers, or maricones, like they say in my country. We are more than that. And looking at this ancient testimony, I remember my grandmother used to say that all the time to me. Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? But I always remember my grandmother saying it because boys have to dress like boys. You are God's temple. God made you a boy. You have to look like a boy. You have to do what you're supposed to do. And you're supposed to take care of that body. Don't get tattoos. Don't wear shorts. Look righteous because you are God's temple. And I don't like to disagree with my grandmother very much. But I think Paul is a bit deeper than that. Paul was a guy who liked to challenge people to think a lot. And the city he was writing to, Corinth, is not very different from New York City. It was a big, awful city, full of money. And when I saw the image on the front, I thought, hey, that looks like Corinth. There's that big golden calf and Godzilla just tearing through it. But Corinth really was like New York City. It was a city of oppression, a city of exploitation, a city where people were told, if you are a slave, you have nothing else to look for in this world. And I would like to translate that to New York City right now. If you are a young black man, if you are poor, if you choose to be anything different than what the norm is, you have nothing else to look for in this life. And Paul, who likes to piss a lot of people off and challenge us to think more, would tell us right now that God's temple is not this building. That would be very easy to say. It's the most simple thing we can say. Well, that's God's church right there. That's where God lives. And also because we like to also sometimes, it's a bad habit that sometimes Christians have of separating what is the flesh and what is the spirit. And Paul very wonderfully, very nicely, and very succinctly tells us that Spirit of the Lord is within you. You are God's temple. There's nothing else to look for. You are right there. And it sometimes makes me think, well, what does it mean to be God's temple? What does it mean to have God inside of me? It's a funny feeling to think that you have God inside of you, right? Especially when you're queer. Does that mean God is queer inside of you? What does that mean? But it makes me think a bit more than just that. It makes me think, how do we tend to God's temple? How do we protect and defend that temple of the Lord? What do we do to that spirit that's inside of us? And coming from Cuba, I cannot be more concrete and clear than to say that the first thing that hurts and attacks the temple of the Lord, the Spirit of the Lord within me and within 11 million Cubans, is the U.S. blockade. It might not be the most important issue on gay pride, but for me, there's nothing more gay pride than talking about the reality that affects us. Because this affects all gay people in Cuba. We have this immoral, inhumane policy designed by the United States government to starve, to hurt, to attack, to maim. That's how it's written out on paper by the US government, just so you know that I'm quoting. The people of Cuba, so as they can change the regime. And what this concretely looks like is that because of this US blockade, the people of Cuba cannot receive an aspirin, computers, spare car parts, all the basic things that we rely on in society, that the US produces, Cuba cannot purchase. And you can imagine how terrible that is, living in a society when you're told that the country that produces 90% of products in this world, you have no access to that. But what attacks and hurts the temple of the Lord in Cuba, our spirits, is not just that. We still face an immense discrimination, immense attacks on our humanity. But surprisingly, it's not from society. It's not from the Cuban government like some people would like to think. We're not being oppressed. We're not being told we can't be LGBT, we can't be queer. Rather, we're facing this within the churches. Because we still have a theology that continues to tell us that if the Lord is going to reside in you, you have to be one way. And that one way, is that square-cut image that we tend to have sometimes. If you are a man, you have to be a man. And in Cuba, that sometimes look like having a little mustache and dressing nice in a shirt. And you have to like women, and that's how it is. And women, what is their responsibility? They're only there to reproduce and serve men. And every day we are struggling to break those things inside the church. Those ideas that repress that Spirit of the Lord. And I hope not to wear you out today, because I'm hoping to go marching as well. Because there's nothing better that we could do on Pride Sunday than to pray with our feet, so that we can continue building for our human dignity. But I want to leave you all thinking, just simply, that today, just like you, people in Cuba are struggling. They're struggling for a world without repression, for a world without discrimination, or a world without homophobia, a world without transphobia, a world without any phobias. Because our bodies truly are that living sanctuary. And if you agree with me, say amen, or say A, or say something. Amen. But we must defend that temple of the Lord. Not these walls. We don't defend walls. We don't defend concrete. We don't defend stones. We defend the human being in all of us. We defend the beautiful smiles on each of our faces. And we must defend that, sadly, today, in a world where there's still blockades that force hunger and desperation on people. We must defend those smiles today in a world that still insists on seeing gay people and lesbians and transgender and transsexuals and all people of who we consider ourselves sexual deviants to be a disease. And I want to ask you to do something we like to do in Cuba, if you don't mind, which is to take the hand of the person next to you. And we do this a lot because we like to feel each other's warmth. We're constantly moving around and trying to see where people are at. What do you feel in each other's hands? What is that pulse that you feel? Or that sweat that you feel on the other person's hand? Is that not the energy of the Lord passing through you? Do that every day. It's a daily exercise. Make sure to feel the person next to you. Make sure to feel that Spirit of the Lord, that human dignity. When you do that, think of your Cuban brothers and sisters. When you do that, think of your brothers and sisters here in New York City, who are less, but who are the more. Thank you, and may the Lord be with you now and always.